For this video, I'm just going to run through some resources that I wish I knew a bit about when I was learning about web dev, and I think they can really help newcomers. So the first resource I'd recommend is this one. This is the CS50 Hartford course. It's free online. It says here free optional upgrade. I think that's like if you want a certificate or something. The certificate really doesn't matter in the end. And if we come down here, it looks like it goes through C, Python, SQL, JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. I can't imagine it'd be too. So what you'll learn down here, it says we're going to be learning C, Python, SQL, JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. I can't imagine it goes too deep into any of those topics. Probably C the most, because I presume that's what the course is. So down here, what you'll learn, you have C, Python, SQL, JavaScript, and CSS plus HTML. I can't really imagine it goes too deep into either of those or any of those. Maybe C is probably the deepest. I think that's what they started with programming in. You'll probably learn about functions, different data types, things like that. Those are pretty important. That's kind of the main draw you want to get from this course. Also, I think SQL is probably going to be pretty important for you if you want to do web dev, especially on the back end. But it's pretty easy to pick up. There's a lot of resources online, so I wouldn't be too worried about it if it's not super great in this course. So here I have a couple tasks. I think they're pretty important, especially when you're starting out. They kind of help you internalize what's going on, help you get a deeper understanding, and instead of just following tutorials, you're actually building something, which is the most important. So first, let's have temperature or weight conversion, things like Fahrenheit to Celsius and back, or pounds to kilograms, things like that. It's pretty easy. It's usually just going to be like one function. The math behind is pretty easy. You can just look up what the formula is, but it really helps you understand functions. It helps you understand the different types you're going to be taking and what you're going to be returning. So definitely recommend that one, especially if you're starting out. Guess the number game. This one's pretty universal. I see a lot of people learning when they're starting out. And it's basically, you're going to have a random number. You're going to use some sort of a random function, depending on the language you're using. And then you're going to have users enter a number. So let's take this random number to be 40. And say I guess 30. It's going to say, my number's too low, guess higher. So if I guess higher and say 80, then it'll say, too high, guess lower. And you'll want to keep doing this until you narrow it down to one number. So it's going to help you understand loops, especially a while loop in this case. Pretty important, pretty easy to implement, and it'll make you feel like you're actually building something, which is the most important part. So next up is Hangman. It's pretty basic. You have X amount of lives or guesses, I guess. And if you get it right, the letter right, you don't lose a life. If you get it wrong, you lose a life. And what's cool about this is you can represent the word with strings and have them in, say, like an array or in a list, so that, it chooses randomly every time you play. Or if you want to go a step farther and learn a bit more, you can try having it in a file and opening the file to read this. It shouldn't be too much more difficult, and it's a pretty good learning opportunity, so I recommend that. Last on the list, we have basic data structures. This isn't something that's too hard to internalize. Once you kind of get the ideas of what's going on with the data structures, the implementation is probably a bit harder. You're going to have to think about it for a little bit. I recommend Geeks for Geeks for this. They have a lot of different tools and representations of all these different data structures. They have a lot of good drawings and explanations, and they have different implementations, the code for them in a lot of different languages, in different variety of languages. Most of the top languages, Python, Java, C#, C++, things like that. So you'll be able to get a good understanding of it and be able to implement it yourself. The next thing I'm going to recommend if you're starting out as a web dev is HTML and CSS. I know this is kind of talked about in the CS50 course. I don't know how deep it goes into it. So here we have W3 Schools. This is definitely a good resource, especially for HTML and CSS, JavaScript too a little bit. So basically it's different tidbits about CSS attributes, HTML tags, things like that. So it's kind of just like a quick reference book maybe. I definitely recommend the MDN web docs if you're learning CSS and HTML too. And they have a whole section on getting started with CSS. It's really helpful. It gives you kind of detailed explanation of all the CSS attributes and things like that, which you might not get on different references or different sources. And overall, this resource is pretty good for not only CSS and HTML, and there's a lot of JavaScript functions and methods they have a lot of detailed explanations about, and it's pretty helpful. Also for CSS, I haven't really watched this guy here, Kevin Powell, but everywhere I see on the internet they're praising him. They're saying he does a great job with CSS and HTML. And I did take a quick look at this HTML and CSS course for beginners. It seems it takes it really slow and really explains what's going on, so that's pretty good. And this is especially good for you if you are kind of like a visual learner, if you like YouTube videos. The other sources are maybe a bit better if you're like me and you prefer to just read a document about all this stuff. But yeah, YouTube videos, check out this guy, Kevin Powell. And here we have Coursera, and they have a bunch of different free courses on a bunch of different subjects, from like beginner CS stuff like CS50 to more advanced stuff like we have React here by Meta or Meta Frontend Developer. And I imagine it's pretty good considering Meta or Facebook originally made React. I do believe that there's some courses here that are paid, or it's paid for like a certificate in grading or something. But there's also a lot of good free resources here from a lot of the top tech companies, a lot of the top tech schools. So I definitely recommend checking this out if you want to know more about one particular subject. And here we have Udemy. It's kind of a mixed bag. There's a lot of different courses here explaining different things, different tech frameworks or stacks. They can be really good, but there's also a lot of really bad content on here. So you just kind of pick and choose. You got to be really careful. I really recommend reading reviews, not really on the website, but a bit off the website. Maybe that's Reddit or something similar. But it's really important to really make sure you're getting a good course here. And they also do a kind of a little scam thing with the prices where right now it's $24. But if I were to open this in an incognito tab, maybe it'd be $10. They really change it depending on if you're already a user or when the last time you looked at this was. Sort of like what they do with flights. So definitely be careful with this. I'd only really recommend this if you really want like a deeper dive on one specific subject, and to be really careful with this one. So now you're going to want to be learning some sort of a web library or framework. Here I took the top 3, I guess, most loved or maybe not most used, but definitely popular ones. First up, we have React, we have Vue.js, and we have Svelte. So these will all sort of do the same thing. Svelte and Vue are usually kind of more beginner friendly. I think they're all pretty easy once you understand one of them. They all kind of work the same way, breaking down a big website into different components, smaller pieces, and sticking them together. And personally, I like React the best, and I would recommend going with React, not necessarily because it's my preference. There's a lot of different docs out there, and it's the most used out of the 3. And the next page I'm about to show is a tutorial series focused around React, which is super good, so I definitely recommend doing that. Yo, like the video, subscribe. Thanks. So here's the tutorial I was talking about. It's fullstackopen.com. I'll have all the links to everything I talk about here in the description below. So it just kind of walks you through making a note sharing app with the front end in React. And the back end is an Express app, uses MongoDB. It covers things from the fundamentals of web app, intro to React, using Axios in this case to connect with our API, writing an API in Express, a lot of testing, which can seem a bit boring, but it's pretty important to learn. I wouldn't spend too much time on it though. Part 6 I'm not going to recommend for a beginner. It talks about Redux and Xstate. You don't really need this when you're starting out building basic web apps. 7 is important. React Router, webhooks, CSS, GraphQL. You can skip this one. TypeScript also, you probably just want to skip this one. I like TypeScript, but it's not really essential to the beginner learning. React Native, that's for taking your React web app and putting it on your phone. Skip that one. CI/CD, again, skip. Containers, you don't really need that. Part 13, I'd recommend this one. It talks about using relational databases. And so that's going to use the SQL you learned in the CS50 and other courses or other materials online, and use something like a Postgres or a MySQL. It's really good for relational databases. It's really good for relational data. That's things having a direct connection from one to another or one to many. And for the most case, a lot of the data you use, almost all of it is going to be relational. So it's important to kind of understand what's going on here. And it's pretty simple. The final resource I have here is free CodeCamp. I'm pretty sure they have some sort of a course similar to the one I just showed, where it kind of just walks you through all these different steps, gets you going. But what I really like about this resource is that you can find a lot of really good tutorials on about anything to do with web dev. You can find a lot of really good tutorials on anything to do with web dev, whether that be back end or front end. And I just recommend this if you want to eventually branch out from, say, your Express backend or whatever, maybe an ASP.NET or a Spring of Java. It's really just a quick. It really just gets you going with the new backend really quick. Then you can kind of explore a bit more from there, see if you like it, things like that. And they also have a lot of these YouTube videos, and they're like 3 hours long, but it's a whole tutorial, brings you from start to finish. And it's pretty useful if you are some sort of like a visual learner rather than reading.